eager to meet Hannibal in battle. With his 17-year-old son at his side, also named Publius, who will later become known as Scipio Africanus, Scipio crosses the river Po at Placentia and promptly continues west along the northern bank of the Po. Under his command are mostly less experienced troops, but Scipio is confident of defeating Hannibal. After all, in Scipio's view, he challenged Hannibal on the Rhone, and the Carthaginian general ran away. Hannibal, on the other hand, is quite surprised to learn that Scipio made it back to the Po Valley so quickly. He thinks that Scipio returned with his entire army, but he has no way of knowing that in fact Scipio's troops continued on to Iberia. Thinking that the Romans now have 2 whole armies in the Po Valley, the Carthaginian general fears that this force is now strong enough to deter Gallic tribes from joining him, and he wants a victory, fast. Hannibal knows that the Gallic tribes will not rally to his banner if he doesn't seem confident of defeating Rome. Not wasting any time, he marches his army downstream along the northern bank of the Po River to meet Scipio. Still unaware of each other's exact whereabouts, the 2 generals send scouting parties well ahead of their respective armies as they march towards each other. Each army's scouts soon report the enemy's presence, and both Hannibal and Scipio proceed with caution. The Romans build a pontoon bridge over the Tichinus River and set up camp on the western bank. Meanwhile, some 15 kilometers west, the Carthaginian column also stops and encamps for the night on the flat plain. A day later, both Hannibal and Scipio ride out in force to scout the area in person, each of them eager to gain a crucial early victory, which would inspire the rest of their troops and win support of the Gallic tribes. Hannibal rides with the bulk of his horsemen, while Scipio has all of his cavalry and a small force of Velitus with him. As the 2 contingents move through the flat plain, they soon spot each other because of the clouds of dust thrown up by the hooves of their horses. Both generals decide to deploy their troops for battle. Hannibal arrays his close-order Spanish cavalry in the front and forms the Numidian light cavalry in 2 groups behind the first line. Scipio places his Velitus in the front, aiming to soften up Hannibal's cavalry with javelin throws. Gallic allies form the second line, while the Roman cavalry is in reserve. As both contingents begin closing the distance, Hannibal sees that the Roman cavalry is fewer in number and makes a split-second decision not to engage in skirmishing with the Roman Velitus. Instead, he orders a full-blooded charge against the Roman front line. Scipio quickly responds by leading his cavalry forward, as the Velitus withdraw through the gaps to form a second line, without even managing a single javelin volley due to the onrushing Carthaginians. A few moments later, the cavalry clashes in the center. A fierce, bloody, static melee develops, unlike the usual mobile cavalry encounters of the time. The horses panic in the chaotic close quarters fighting, and many horsemen dismount in order to fight more effectively on foot. For a while the fighting seems indecisive, but this was another ruse by Hannibal. He waits until most of the Roman cavalry is fully committed, and then sends his Numidians on a flanking maneuver. This catches the Romans totally by surprise. Velitus on the flanks spot the envelopment, and some of them panic and flee. The fast Numidian cavalry quickly flows around the Roman flanks and tramples over the scattered light infantry. And then the noose begins to tighten around the Roman contingent. In the melee, Scipio is struck down from his horse. Carthaginian troops close in to finish off the wounded general, but at the final moment he is rescued. One early account of his rescue holds that a Ligurian slave saved the Roman consul, but the more popular version claims that his 17-year-old son Publius charged to rescue his father with a small group of Roman cavalry that clustered around the consul before retreating back towards the Roman camp. As word of Hannibal's victory spreads, Gallic tribes send emissaries to pledge their support. But despite their promises, the Gauls deliver little in the way of reinforcements and supplies during this early stage of the war. This forces Hannibal, whose army goes critically low on food in late 218 BC, to send a cavalry contingent to capture a Roman grain depot at Clastidium, guarded by a Roman garrison. Luckily for Hannibal, the garrison commander is from Brundisium in southern Italy, and when confronted he willingly surrenders the depot and, in return for 400 gold pieces, joins the Carthaginian ranks together with the entire garrison. These troops become the first of the Italian allies to defect and join Hannibal. Meanwhile, the Roman army retreats to Placentia, where they plan to wait for Sempronius and his consular army. Although the defeat at the river Ticinus is far from a major loss, it nevertheless reinforces the apprehension with which the Romans would view Hannibal from now on, and it sets a psychological tone which would be felt in the much larger battles to come. After the defeat at Ticinus, the Roman Senate looks to save face by blaming Gallic allies for being ineffective. Taking comfort in the fact that Hannibal has yet to face the vaunted Roman infantry, long as his arrival to northern Italy restores confidence. Hannibal now faces armies of both Roman consuls. It's early December 218 BC. Publius Scipio's life still hangs in the balance due to wounds he sustained at Ticinus. But, ironically, his troubles are only just starting. His defeat at Ticinus has major consequences for Rome. It directly caused the garrison at Clastidium to surrender the town's massive grain depot. This strips his army of food reserves and disrupts his supply lines, making any advance into enemy territory a risky venture. At the same time, Hannibal finally replenishes his own reserves, which were dwindling ever since he descended from the Alps, right until the clash at Ticinus just a few days ago. The damage to Roman prestige raises the danger of further defections. What's worse, Gallic tribes are flocking to join Hannibal, enthused by his ability to defeat the Romans and his softer administrative touch. Scipio has no option but to retreat, realizing he is deep in hostile territory. He marches to Placentia and makes camp across the Po River. Hannibal pursues and catches up 2 days later. Learning of his arrival, over 2,000 Gauls allied to Rome rise up in the camp and attack Roman soldiers, killing many in their sleep. Before sunrise, they cross the Trebia to join Hannibal, bringing with them the severed heads of slain Romans. Using the Gallic defection as propaganda, Hannibal makes sure to spread the word that Rome's allies are joining him en masse, thereby boosting his popularity among the tribes. Scipio again moves south, not wanting to risk being caught in the open. A day later, he reaches the hills and sets up camp in a strong position, with hills protecting his flanks from cavalry attacks. Then, he settles in and waits for reinforcements. By mid-December, the two consuls join forces. Discussing how to confront Hannibal, Scipio argues against taking the field, stressing that Longus's troops lack experience and need additional training, having been raised less than a year ago. Longus disagrees and sets up camp a few kilometers north from Scipio's position. Just as eager to fight as Longus, Hannibal maintains his camp on the flat plain and surveys the potential battlefield west of the Trebia River. Meanwhile, he sends a raiding party to ravage the area along the river, suspecting that Gallic tribes living there, who pledged allegiance to him, are now negotiating with the Romans. It's unclear if the Gauls intended to betray Hannibal, but with their villages now being raided, some of the tribesmen appeal to the Romans for help. Longus promptly sends 1,000 Velitus across the river to attack the raiders. With Hannibal's troops scattered across the area and encumbered by plunder, Roman troops start picking off small groups of Carthaginians, quickly routing the raiders. Seeing this, troops on duty outside Hannibal's camp rush to the aid of the retreating raiding party. The fighting is fierce, as both sides want to prove their superiority, but the Roman Velitus are soon forced into a fighting retreat. The skirmish escalates rapidly, spreading across a large area. More and more troops from each side join in. Pockets of clashes develop as neither side is able to shore up its ranks. It becomes apparent that the chaotic skirmish might turn into a full-scale battle that neither commander will be able to control. Hannibal takes the initiative. He stops sending more troops into the fray, trying to avoid a battle that he did not plan and can do little to influence. He then audaciously rides out in person and rallies the scattered troops. He pulls them back and arrays them in a line outside the camp. The Romans advance, but Hannibal restrains his men from charging the enemy. The Romans too halt their advance, refusing to attack the well-positioned Carthaginians